The gavel struck the judge's desk, silencing the low murmur of the courtroom. All eyes turned toward the center of the room, where a woman in a wheelchair sat poised and unshaken. Her presence alone defied the very expectations of those around her. The case seemed predetermined, the outcome already assumed. But what no one realized was that this day would change everything. Jasmine Carter was no ordinary attorney. She had spent her life fighting battles no one believed she could win. From the moment she rolled into that courtroom, the prosecution, the jury, even the judge himself saw her as an anomaly, an underdog playing in a game where the rules were stacked against her. They smirked, they whispered, they doubted. And then the judge laughed. That single chuckle, laced with arrogance, rang through the room. It was the sound of dismissal, the sound of a system that had long decided who was worthy of respect and who was not. But Jasmine, she didn't flinch. Because this wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Witness the story of how a disabled black woman in a wheelchair shattered every expectation, turned a trial upside down, and left an entire courtroom in awe of her unmatched legal brilliance. This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's a lesson in resilience, justice, and the power of a mind that refuses to be ignored. Stay tuned, because once this story begins, you won't be able to look away. Enough for the prosecution to share knowing glances. Enough for the jury to shift. The air in the courtroom was thick with an unspoken bias, a collective doubt that hung over the proceedings like a heavy fog. The wooden benches were filled with spectators, some curious, others dismissive, but all of them watching the scene unfold with varying degrees of skepticism. The prosecution sat at their table, smug and self-assured, their case seemingly airtight, their victory all but secured. At the center of it all sat the judge, an older man with years of experience and a reputation for being particularly unforgiving. His sharp eyes swept over the courtroom until they landed on the woman in the wheelchair. He arched an eyebrow, a smirk forming on his lips as if he had just spotted a child attempting to play a game meant for adults. A low chuckle escaped him. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. In their seats, enough for the courtroom to absorb the message. This woman, this disabled black woman in a wheelchair, was not a real threat. She was an anomaly, an oddity, a mere formality in a case that had already been decided in their minds. The moment was brief, but its impact was deafening. A ripple of quiet amusement passed through the room, a few whispers exchanged, a few smirks concealed behind hands. To them, this was a spectacle. A woman who had no place here, daring to stand, or rather, sit, against the towering machinery of the legal system. But what they didn't know, what they had yet to realize, was that they were in the presence of a force far greater than they could comprehend. They had already made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated Jasmine Carter. She noticed the laughter, the condescension, the dismissive glances. She had seen them all her life. But as always, she let none of it affect her. She sat there, composed, her hands resting gently on the table, her eyes locked onto the judge's with unwavering confidence. This wasn't the first time someone had laughed at her, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But by the time this trial was over, she knew one thing for certain: no one in that courtroom would ever laugh at her again. In a quiet courtroom filled with murmurs of doubt, an air of arrogance lingered as a seasoned judge peered down at a disabled black woman in a wheelchair. The case seemed like an easy win for the prosecution, and the judge chuckled under his breath, assuming that the woman, struggling with both mobility and perception, was in over her head. But what he didn't realize was that he was about to witness one of the most astonishing legal turnarounds in history. Jasmine Carter had never known an easy day in her life. From the moment she was born, she faced challenges that most people could never fathom. A childhood marked by hardship, growing up in a neighborhood riddled with systemic injustice, she had learned early on that she would have to work twice as hard as everyone else to be seen as equal. Her disability was something she had learned to live with, but society's perception of it, that was another battle altogether. People saw her wheelchair before they saw her brilliance. Teachers underestimated her. Peers pitied her, but Jasmine never let that stop her. She was born with a mind sharper than steel and a willpower that refused to break. Through sheer determination, she made it to law school, one of the best in the country. She studied relentlessly, spending nights buried in legal texts, dissecting every case, every argument, every loophole. When others were partying, she was preparing. When others slept, she strategized. And when she graduated at the top of her class, no one could say it was luck. It was pure, unshakable skill. The case that brought her to this courtroom, Jasmine, wasn't just here as a lawyer. She was here to defend an innocent man. Marcus Williams, a young black man, had been accused of a crime he didn't commit. A robbery gone wrong, the victim seriously injured, and Marcus found himself at the wrong place at the wrong time. The evidence against him was flimsy, based on biased witness testimonies and manipulated forensic reports. But in a system that had failed so many before him, Marcus was facing years behind bars. And the judge? A man known for being tough on defendants like Marcus. A man who saw people like Jasmine and Marcus as easy losses. So when Jasmine rolled into that courtroom, head high, eyes filled with unshakable confidence, the judge smirked. "A lawyer?" he said, shaking his head. "This should be interesting." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. The prosecution exchanged amused glances. Even some members of the jury had a hard time hiding their skepticism. Jasmine, however, remained unbothered. She had seen this reaction before. She had lived it. And she was about to prove them all wrong. From the moment Jasmine spoke, the courtroom changed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't falter. Instead, she presented her opening statement with such confidence, such poise, that the laughter died down almost immediately. She spoke of justice, of truth, of how the system had failed time and time again. And then she turned to Marcus. "This man is not guilty," she said, her voice steady. "And by the time this trial is over, you will see exactly why." Then the real battle began. The prosecution came at her hard. They brought out their so-called evidence, tried to paint Marcus as a criminal, used every underhanded trick in the book. But Jasmine? She was ready for them. She tore their arguments apart, piece by piece. A legal genius unleashed. With every witness, she exposed inconsistencies. With every piece of evidence, she found loopholes. With every legal statute, she outmaneuvered the prosecution. She cross-examined their key witness so thoroughly that he ended up contradicting himself multiple times. The so-called forensic evidence? She proved it had been tampered with. The supposed motive? She demonstrated that it was built on nothing but racial bias. As the hours passed, the once smirking judge leaned forward, his amusement replaced with disbelief. The prosecution, who had once been so confident, scrambled to keep up. By the time closing arguments arrived, Jasmine delivered a speech so powerful, so unshakable, that the gallery erupted in murmurs. She spoke of justice, of the burden of proof, of the fact that Marcus was not on trial for his actions, but for the color of his skin. "This isn't justice," she said, her voice unwavering. "This is a system that has failed too many innocent people. But today we have the power to do something different. Today we have the power to get it right." Silence filled the room as she finished. The jury was visibly shaken. The verdict that shocked everyone. When the judge read the verdict, not guilty, a gasp swept through the courtroom. Marcus let out a breath he had been holding for what felt like forever. Tears streamed down his mother's face. Jasmine simply nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. The judge, now looking at her with a newfound respect, cleared his throat before speaking. "I misjudged you," he admitted, his voice devoid of the arrogance he once carried, "and I was wrong." Jasmine, ever poised, simply replied, "I'm used to it." As Jasmine rolled out of the courtroom, the echoes of the judge's stunned admission still lingered in the air. The murmurs of the gallery had shifted from doubt to admiration, their expressions reflecting the weight of what they had just witnessed. Some looked away, ashamed of their earlier skepticism. Others watched her with newfound respect, recognizing that they had been in the presence of something extraordinary. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to revel in the judge's apology. She had seen moments like this before, when people realized their own biases, when they were forced to confront the painful truth that they had underestimated someone based on nothing more than appearance. Jasmine had long since stopped seeking validation from those who had written her off before even giving her a chance. But this victory was different. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about Marcus, about justice, about the many others who had sat in that very same defendant's chair without a voice loud enough, strong enough to fight for them. And today, the system had been forced to listen. As she exited the courtroom, Marcus and his family rushed toward her, tears of gratitude streaming down their faces. His mother clasped Jasmine's hands tightly, her voice trembling with emotion. "You saved my son," she whispered. "You gave him his life back." Jasmine smiled, a rare softness crossing her otherwise resolute expression. "He deserved the truth," she replied simply. And the truth deserved to be heard. Meanwhile, the judge remained seated at his bench, staring after her as though replaying the entire trial in his mind. For the first time in years, he questioned his own instincts, his own judgments. Today, he had been taught a lesson, one he would never forget. This wasn't just a win, this was a reckoning, and the legal world, it would never be the same again. As she rolled out of the courtroom, she left behind more than just a victory. She left behind a lesson in resilience, in brilliance, in the undeniable power of the human mind. This was more than just a case. This was a statement, and the legal world, it would never be the same again. This story isn't just about a courtroom battle. It's about perseverance. It's about proving barriers. It's about proving that talent and intelligence cannot be measured by physical ability or the color of one's skin. Jasmine Carter didn't just win a case, she redefined what it means to fight for justice, and she reminded us all that true power lies in resilience, intellect, and an unshakable belief in oneself. If you found this story inspiring, be sure to subscribe to A1 Storyteller for more powerful narratives that challenge perspectives and ignite change. Until next time, keep believing, keep fighting, and never let anyone define your limit.